Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Addiction, Alcoholism, and the Three Principles. My name is Greg Suchy, here again with Harry Durbitsky, and today we're excited to be joined again by Dr. Bill Pettit. Today we're going to talk about really how having an understanding of the nature of these three universal principles is the key to the spiritual healing which cures the addiction. And I think it's a very important topic to talk about. The healing of the addiction through the spiritual healing is something I've definitely experienced myself. It's really the key. It really is, like Bill's going to talk about. I talk to a lot of people who are concerned about like one particular thing or a couple particular things. They say, well, I got the principles, but and all these things dropped off, all these bad habits, all these things I didn't want just went away. But there's this one or two left. And in my experience, the more you focus on those one or two things, the longer they stay around. It's more focusing on that core issue. Those are all symptoms. And when you correct the core issue, which is some sort of spiritual disconnect, usually from self, everything else just takes care of itself in its own time. And I think it's going to be a great topic to cover. And I'll go ahead and hand it over to Harry, and then we'll get over to Bill and get this thing going.
Yeah, it's a great topic, which Bill and I tossed around in our head when we wanted to present something like that to the conference that's happening in May 14th to 16th in St. Paul, and which Bill and I are going to be doing a joint presentation on SID, the meaning he has to our heart, to our life, to our spiritual understanding and psychological understanding. And then it finishes with a video by Sid and so on. But one of the things that I've asked Bill to do on this show is to talk about his own personal experience. I'm about 22 chapters into my new book, and there's an aspect which I feel his experience will add to the scenario of it. And although Bill said to me that many people have heard his story, I haven't. And I would love for Bill to start with that, and then we'll get more deeply into the topic.
Okay. Well, many of you have heard, and some haven't, obviously, that I met Sid ironically on April Fool's Day.
Excuse me.
Yeah, you think that's really funny, Harry, huh?
Yeah.
Well, it's ironic, and yet it was perfect. It was April Fool's Day of 1983, which is coming on 37 years ago this April. I had left psychiatry. I was 41 years old. I had left psychiatry because I didn't see people really getting cured, getting in touch with mental well-being. I saw them getting some relief from medications at times to varying degrees, but I didn't see anybody finding peace of mind from a pill. I didn't have it myself. I wasn't on medications, but I had gone in and out of clinical depression for 21 years. I had seen 6 different psychiatrists. That often was a shock to my clients when I was in clinical psychiatric practice, which I stopped last December, about a year ago, and have just totally do 3 principles, mentoring and consulting now. But in 1983, I had left psychiatry, and I had taken a job in California with a company called LifeSpring. It was a adult educational experiential training group, and I was traveling the country doing programs in New York and Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia and Phoenix and Denver and Los Angeles and San Diego, etc. I even did one in Tokyo, Japan, in Calgary, Canada. And it was about the programs. It doesn't matter. They were about trying to get people to their true essence, but it was without the understanding that we have of the principles. And so there I was, sitting I'd met Dr. George Pransky in January of that year of 1983, and I had heard that people were coming to him that were hopeless and had been told that they could not get any improvement from their mental state, and that many people, more often than not, were leaving Dr. Pransky after working with him. For some reason, I've got an echo.
Yeah.
Harry, try muting yourself.
I think it's coming from me. Okay. Yep.
How about now? Am I okay now?
Nope, still an echo. Must be on your end, Bill. Oh, well, it's not that bad.
Well, because what I can do is I here and go to my system. Shoot, I know that we can. Let's see.
You know what? Try.
It's probably me. Hey, it's probably me, guys.
No, you were muted.
Circle's good.
You were muted, so it wasn't you.
Are we okay now? Are we okay now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
We're
sounds
okay
good.
now?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, maybe it was whoever it was. Okay. So anyway, there I was. I had befriended Dr. Pransky and spent some time with him, and I did not know what he was talking about, but I knew there was truth there. I could feel it. I could feel it. And he asked me if I would come on April Fool's Day that weekend to a Friday evening and a Saturday and a Sunday where Dr. George Pransky, where Sid Banks, his teacher, he said, was going to come and speak in San Francisco. And there were nearly, I think, 250 people there. It was a large gathering. And as I sat there, remember now, I'm 41 years old. I've been in psychiatry for 10 years. I've had 26 and a half years of formal education. I've had 800 lectures at least on mental illness and medications to try to relieve these, quote, mental illnesses. And I have had not one lecture on mental health. Not one. And yet, when I became board certified in psychiatry, what did they call me? They called me a mental health professional. It would have been far more true to call me a mental illness professional, because I knew a whole lot about mental illness. And even though I know now that I had perfect mental health inside of me all the time, I had very little realization of that mental well-being that I had. As I sat in the audience listening to Mr. Banks, within about, I don't know, I'm sure I've said different times, somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes into it, I realized that this welder with a 9th grade education knew 1,000 times more about mental health than I did. It was humbling. I've had people say, oh gosh, that must have been horrible. I said, no, it was far from horrible. It was wondrous, because for the first time in my life, I felt hope. I felt hope that I could find what he was pointing to, that it was within me and had been within me all the time. I thought that things external to me had been taking away my mental well-being. Everything from my genetic makeup to early childhood experiences to my wife, my kids, my finances, my health. I never knew when somebody was going to say or do something that was going to take away any good feeling that I had. I felt like Pinocchio. I felt like I had been living like Pinocchio for 41 years of my life and handing out strings to people and things. And then I had no control. I did not wake up any day. I remember praying that my wife and I would not have an argument that day. My late wife, Sue, who was a wonderful lady, as of course, as those of you know that Linda is, and we were both widowed 3 years before we got together. But my late wife, I used to pray. I don't know whether I thought that the argument bird would drop arguments on our heads and we'd have an argument. I didn't know that I had anything to do with that. I didn't know that I had anything to do with my own mental well-being, with living a peaceful, joyful life. And so as I sat there, I realized that I had been going in and out of clinical depression for 21 years because figuratively, 6 to 9 hours a day at least, I'd been hitting myself in the head, misusing these beautiful principles that we're going to talk about. This is the power of thought, mind, and consciousness, but I was misusing them in a way that was literally causing me incredible dysregulation in my brain. And because I didn't understand what happened when that happened and realized that those bad feelings that I got were really wonderful signals and alarms and love letters that were letting me know that I was looking in the wrong direction, I got more frightened by them. And the worse I felt physically and mentally, the more frightened I got. And the more thinking I did, the more analyzing. And then wondering why I felt miserable a good percentage of the time. I realized that day I realized that I was creating that experience by 6 to 9 hours of, if you will, metaphorically hitting myself in the head with my fist and then wondering at the end of the day why I had another bad headache. And I think it's worth relating even right now to substance use and to substance use disorders and to addiction, because if you're in constant pain, emotional pain and physical pain, because emotional pain lowers the pain threshold tremendously through the microbiome in our gut and back through our brain, you look for something to give you relief from the pain, from the emotional and physical pain, and you weigh what will do that the best for you. That's what's heredity. Heredity is one person finds opioids, another person finds alcohol, another person finds eating and puking, another person finds hoarding, another person finds that to try to relieve that pain. And as I sat there, I realized that I was causing my pain, my depressions, but I didn't see how to stop doing it. But just the idea that I saw that I was the one doing it. I always thought my depression was being caused by things that I had absolutely no control over. So to have that shift to me, that it was coming from me, gave me hope, because if it's coming from me, there's a chance, and certainly Sid pointed to it, that within everybody there is the capacity to understand how the system works so that you don't hurt yourself with these beautiful gifts that have been given to us to navigate our way through life. So I felt hope for the first time that that could happen to me if I started looking in the right direction instead of trying to figure it out. So that was my first experience, you know, and I'll go on just for a little bit, because I was asked the other day, so how did that affect me? Well, the first thing I started to notice was I started to see that I was the cause of my anger. That I used to think, I may be exaggerating, but there were times that I would go through that I would have a hissy fit 7 to 10 times a day, where I would get pissed off at somebody or something that wasn't the way I wanted it to be. I'm sure nobody in the audience has ever had those experiences, but I did.
Nope.
Yeah, I know you, especially Harry. You never did that. Yeah.
No, that's preposterous.
Oh, no, why? I never. Shoot.
Oh, I suddenly realized that I was the one. I saw myself creating the anger, And I saw that it wasn't the other person. It's just that when people didn't do what I wanted them to do the way I wanted them to do it, and when the world didn't realize that keeping Bill Pettit happy was the reason the universe existed, I suddenly started realizing that the anger, the piss-off machine, was in my back pocket. And that when people or things weren't the way I wanted them to be, I turned on the piss-off machine, got pissed off, had a hissy fit, and then blamed it on something external to me. And there was a justification at the time. I was righteously miserable, but I had no frigging control over my mental well-being because I thought it was at the mercy of other people, circumstances, things, etc. So that's the first thing I saw. The second thing I saw that every one of us live in a separate reality. And the way I saw that first was I saw that my wife of 10 years, who we had actually gotten divorced, and then we're back together after 3 years when we met Sid and George. And I realized that she and I were not living in the same world. We were not experiencing the same world. And for the first 10 years of our marriage, whenever those differences came up, we would argue about who was right. One of us had to be right and the other one had to be wrong. And it led to loss of intimacy, loss of joy, loss of respect. And it was innocent because neither of us understood that. And once I started to truly understand that we were not experiencing the world in the same way, it allowed me, and as I started to stop pissing myself off so many times a day, I'd have more moments of calm to where I actually saw that I could listen to my wife, and my world got bigger because I started to get glimpses of the world that she was living in. It was different from mine. And the other thing that happened was, even though I saw that there were things that were important to her that were not important to me in my world, they became important to me for one simple reason. They were important to her. That made them important to me. So our relationship started to shift. And those were the first two things I think that really happened for me. So.
And what role did Sid play? Did you see Sid's contribution to unveiling your insight? Which, by the way, whether it's psychological or spiritual, they're all spiritual insights, one way or another.
Well, again, it wasn't Sid the person, and I think it's important for people to know that it was the message that he gave that there are these spiritual principles, and all spiritual means is that it has no form. It's formless. That's what spiritual means. It means that there's no form. You and I, if I died this instant, I would weigh at the instant that I died, or 10 seconds afterwards, I would weigh the same that I weighed when I was alive. So something that doesn't have any form would be gone, and I would no longer be alive. Somebody's
I'm
turned.
sorry. No, me. It's Prickles and Goo. I'm sorry. They actually did like a study or something. They weighed somebody like as they died, and they weighed some measurable amount, like a spirit or something left them. They weighed like 3 ounces less or something like that I've heard of. But that's all.
The body starts to change quickly after the spirit leaves. Just as we know when a plant is dead, or we know when an animal is dead or alive, right? There's something, the psyche, the spiritual. Sid talked about this, didn't he, Harry? How psychology, missed the boat, because psychology means the study of the soul, the study of the mind, the study of the formless aspect of being human. When I taught psychiatry to the residents, I used to take the word psychiatrist and I'd say, do any of you know the Greek roots to the word psychiatrist? And with a straight face, I would say iatria, the ist means one who, and the iatria means one who chooses, and psyche means the right medicine. So a psychiatrist is really simple by the Greek roots. It means one who chooses the right medicine. And one of the residents would say, really? And I'd say, no. It really means one who heals the soul, one who heals the mind. That's the true meaning of it. And if you start to understand the principles, then you can point people. You don't do the healing. I don't do the healing. What's true is that there's nothing to heal. But you start to realize the pure mental well-being that's present there. You know, Harry and I were talking earlier. I just read through Audible almost 750-page book by Sapolsky called Behave, and I really am going to reconnect with him after many years. But he doesn't see that he says all this brilliant science, but he doesn't see the spiritual. He doesn't see that there's a missing piece. And if people don't understand that we are literally formless energy that has taken form, I mean, even the scientists, David Bohm, Albert Einstein, the scientists all say everything that you and I see, everything that exists in the universe is the same energy in a different disguise.
So does that what it means? Before Greg came on, we were talking about the true nature of the principles. And I'd like to hear, Marty, could you tell us what you think is the true nature of the principles? You have to unmute yourself, Marty.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh. I wasn't planning on speaking in any way, but the true nature of the principles is really, as Bill says, is the absence of ego. And it actually is, this is even an intellectual point of view, but it's actually nothing. This is, like Sid said, the state of no thought. So to me, it's very simple. The less I think and the less I try to figure out or have an opinion of the universe, the quicker I go to my true source. So nature is, nothingness is not nothing. It's not emptiness. It's a state of presence, clear presence. That's what I think the nature is.
Okay. I kind of agree with that. One of the things that hit me when I read what Sid thought nature was, one of the things he stated was they exist. And I thought, gee, that's true. You have to come to a realization that these principles exist for them to manifest and use in a wise way. So how do you relate to that, Bill?
Well, to me, you know, the nature just means what's the essential quality of something. Yeah, that's what the nature of something is, and the essential quality of the principles are a metaphor. You know, Sid said that you have to speak in metaphor. You know, I love that statement that he makes in the first chapter of The Missing Link, where he says the divine passes from the formless to the form. And as human beings, we are both spectators and participants in this spiritual theater called life. Now, and then he says, the great mystics of the world who tried to explain such knowledge had no choice but to speak in metaphors, knowing that their words were only a representation of the spiritual wisdom formless wisdom that lies within the consciousness of all human beings. And then he makes this preposterous statement to people that don't understand the principles. All human psyches are rooted in universal truth, and no person's psyche is better than any other's. Only to the degree of the individual's psychological and spiritual understanding does it appear to vary. And people even said to Sid, they said, "You mean the people in the back wards of mental hospitals?" He said, "Absolutely. Absolutely. Because they have the same spiritual wisdom within them that they've innocently covered over with their thinking." I was recently, and I'm trying to find the reference, when the Germans invaded Russia and they went further and further into Russia, at one point they rocket attacked a mental hospital in Russia. There were records of people in that mental hospital that had all these diagnoses of schizophrenia, many of them in catatonic. They hadn't spoken for years. When those rockets hit, something became more important to those people than their thinking. And they suddenly mobilized themselves and started helping the wounded, started helping in any way they could. They acted totally from their mental well-being. Why? Because they got decentered from their thinking. And it's interesting that being able to be alone with your own thinking is one of the greatest accomplishments any human being can have. And the wonderful thing is that it comes naturally with an incremental understanding of the principles. And I want to underline the incremental understanding that Greg talked about earlier, I think, or at least pointed to, that listen, there is no it, folks. Sid said there's an infinite number of doors of insight. Infinite number of doors of insight into the nature of these principles. And I always kiddingly say, the last I looked at my math book, that's a really big number. Really big number. And what that means is that, to me, as Greg talked about earlier too, when we first have our insight that it's an inside-out world, that our experience is being created one thought at a time. There is nothing we can experience except a thought-created experience. The deeper that understanding comes of the principles, that's not just something we believe, it's something that we experience. And when I'm not experiencing that, when I feel emotional pain, I truly do kind of get excited. People say, "What?" The reason I get excited is because I know that I've come upon something that my level of understanding, this is an exception. That this is not inside out. This is an exception to these universal principles, which is bullshit. There are no exceptions to universal principles. So I know that if I allow my mind to quiet, if I just get present in my life as best as I can, I am being given an opportunity to go through one or two or whatever number of doors of understanding, new doors of understanding of these principles. And I could tell you that my journey for 37 years, in some ways, if having a full understanding of the principles is going on 100 yards of a football field, I think I'm up to the 6-yard line. Maybe it's the 3-yard.
On which side?
Yeah, from the start. And the reason I say that is because I get glimpses that I know so very little. At the other hand, I am filled with gratitude at the little that I've seen. Because people could offer me I don't care what number. You make up a number, 10 billion. They talk about amounts of money, $20 billion. And all I had to do was forget what the little bit that I've seen. I would tell them to take their $10 billion and give it to charity somewhere and help more people have food and water and education. Because I don't need that if that's the price I have to pay.
One of the things when you were talking, Bill, that came to my mind was Sid had a conundrum, because before he was enlightened, everybody could understand him. And then after he was enlightened, and this is true for all of us, nobody seemed to be able to understand him. And he couldn't understand because he was speaking English. Yeah, he had a Scottish accent, but he was speaking English. And then all of a sudden, he realized the reason people weren't understanding him is because he was expressing insights, insight after insight after insight. And people could not grasp what he was talking about. And that, to me, is another aspect of the nature of the principles, is that as we open up to who we are, and what you were alluding to, Bill, there's so much more that starts to come out of us in a very mystical way, in a very surprising way. Because I think all of us experience we're not as beautiful as we really are in our mind. And then we see that this spiritual nature starts to change everything, not only around us, but as Bill is alluding, inside us. And it originates from within inside of us. But as we grow in levels of consciousness, we have no choice but to let it go, because that's the definition of growing in levels of consciousness. You're not holding on to your attachments. You're letting it free. You're letting it raw. And that is the most beautiful thing in the world. And when being around Sid, I suddenly realized that's what he was living. He was living a release of unlimited insights. And of course, he wanted to share that with the world. Thank goodness. Because if he didn't have that, if we didn't have that exposure to his spiritual insight, none of us would be here together today and learning from each other, learning from Bill, learning from Greg. It's just a Marty from all of us.
And keep in mind, this is something that's a source of a lot of frustration and unnecessary suffering that I've seen with a lot of the people I've worked with. Just because you have some sort of understanding of these principles does not mean that thoughts go away. It doesn't, you're never free from thoughts, but what you're free from is the attachment to them. You see them as what they are. And I love it when I catch myself caught up in my thinking and I just laugh. And people look at me like I'm crazy because it might be in the middle of work and I'm just standing there laughing. And it's like, I did it again. It just happened again. That's the thing that's changed for me. It's you don't get rid of the thoughts. It's just like having an understanding of gravity doesn't get rid of gravity. And understanding thermodynamics doesn't stop heat transfer. Things still work how they work. You just have a better understanding of it. With a better understanding of thermodynamics, maybe you won't get burned by something, or you'll be able to use energy more efficiently. Understanding gravity better has allowed us to build taller buildings, and combine that with other principles, and then we've got flight, we have aerodynamics, we have all these other things going on. But they don't get rid of the thing that we're trying to understand with them. And understanding these three principles doesn't get rid of thought. We are still living in a world of thought with this understanding. It's just now we know not to take it so seriously. It's just thought passing through. Let it pass through. And to me, that's more of what meditation is about too. It's not a place of no thought. It's a place of just allowing the thought to pass through. Not giving energy to any one particular thought.
I don't know if that's true, Greg. That one I would dispute a little bit. But definitely what the process of what you're talking about, I do agree with.
Dispute what, Harry? What dispute what? Oh.
Sorry?
What was the dispute?
Whether state of meditation is a world of no thought. Pure state of meditation, in my mind, is a state of no thought. In fact, no thought is the definition of insight.
Well, you know, if you remember, I think what Greg was pointing to, I may be wrong, but what Sid says is when he talks about the state of no thought, we're going to be we're thinking beings. But he's saying that there's a quieting of the personal intellect, so that the thought that comes from that spiritual wisdom, universal mind manifesting as thought. We're going to be, if you hook somebody up, even in the deep state of meditation, there's always their brain is, but it's in a state of when the personal mind is quieted. That's when we have the insights, Harry. But an insight is a thought, but it's from that place of universal mind. It's from a different place. I think Sid clarified that many times. He said, when I speak of no thought, I mean a no thought from the personal intellect. And when we have those moments where our mind quiets and we're totally present, then what happens is that which is within us, that that spiritual wisdom manifesting, a manifestation of universal mind, comes true, and you start to live more and more that way. The metaphor that I use is that more and more in my life, I feel like I keep getting 3x5 cards as the day goes by, and it directs me what to do next. Or being in West Virginia, coal mining country, where the miners would have a light on the top of their head, I feel like that when my personal intellect is quiet, that light, I have that helmet, and the light on its own says, look over here, Bill, look over here, go, oh, okay, go over here. I'll give you an example of this that happened, and it was not talking about me getting quiet. It was my wife. We have a cat that is 20 years old. So that's like 122 or something in cat years. And she's totally blind. She moves very slow, but she knows where her food is, and she knows where her thing is to go poop and pee. And the other night we were going to bed before Christmas, when we headed off Christmas Day to the Midwest. And we realized she wasn't there in Linda's lap. And I'll make this quick. But we said, oh my gosh, where has she gone somewhere to die? Is she in a closet? Did she decide to go off and die somewhere? Because she does move very slowly, but she doesn't appear to be in pain. And then Linda said, I was putting out the lights today, the holiday lights. I wonder if she got away. So I went and got a flashlight, and it's about 9:30 at night, and I'm walking around the neighborhood, and we've got an alley between us and the houses next door. I'm looking everywhere. I'm kind of into, I had somebody tell me that human beings are the only of God's creatures that go faster when it's lost, right? Animals stop. If they're not being chased, they stop and they listen. They do not go anywhere until they know where to go. Now, not that there was anything wrong with me taking a listen and asking. So on the other hand, my wife, Linda, she looked initially and she didn't see him. So you know what she did? She went and sat quietly in her chair. She allowed the personal mind to quiet to a state of no thought. And she says, Bill, I actually heard where to go and what to do. That's those 3x5 cards. She said, I heard, go out to the front, go down the street to the left, and as you get to the end of the house next to you, before the next house, start calling out her name. And that's when I caught up with her, because I knew she felt very sad that this may be the end of the relationship with the kitty, and that she might have had something to do with it by having the door open periodically while she was putting the lights out. And I just wanted to comfort her, and suddenly we heard meow, meow. Now, if she wouldn't had the courage and the knowledge of the principles, the nature of these principles, that there is a spiritual wisdom that Sid talks about that is attempting to guide you every moment of your life, if you're willing to get the wax out of your ears and listen. And that's a small thing. You might say that's a small thing, but you start to live, and you're just grateful for when you have the courage and the faith. Like Sid says, with hope and faith, anything can happen. You have the faith to quiet down and allow your mind to quiet when you don't know what to do, or when you're faced with some health problem or some financial problem or chronic pain or whatever it is. If you know that there is a place of calm, peace of mind, mental well-being, and love available 100% of the time in any circumstance, that changes everything. Everything.
And to know that you have that available to give to somebody else too. To see that innocence within somebody else, it gives that compassion and that love, and it opens that up for them as well. And when you hold that space of love and compassion for somebody else, I've seen people just open up and light up from that, and it's really an amazing thing.
Because it's natural.
Yeah.
It's natural.
Or
If you
supernatural.
Well, it is, yeah, it's supernatural. And I think one of the things that is key is that you can't teach the principles. When people say I teach boy, I can't. I don't appear. I'm not capable of doing that. Sid even said, I can't. You can't teach. He said, I can't teach the principles. I can point to them. I can point with my words. But if any of us were walking along, if Greg and I and Harry and Sue were walking along, and Sue suddenly in a light fog or dusk, she said, "Oh, look at that windmill! Look at that windmill over there." If we didn't know where she was seeing it, we would be looking around 180, 360 degrees up and down. And then she started pointing. She starts pointing to where the windmill is. Well, if we looked at her finger, we would not see where the windmill was. But if we looked beyond her finger to what she was pointing to, we'd have a pretty good chance, one by one, we'd suddenly would say, oh, Greg would say, I see it. Harry would say, I see it. I'd say, yeah, okay, I may not be good, but I'm slow. Okay, I see it. Because we looked beyond where she was pointing, and Sid said that repeatedly. Listen not to my words. I'm just trying to point with them. Look beyond the words. Listen for a positive feeling. Wisdom always comes wrapped in a positive feeling.
Yeah. And that's something that hit me in one of my experiences with depression, was exactly what you're talking about there. The fact that I am feeling bad means that what I'm thinking is incorrect. It means that I'm telling myself a lie when I'm telling myself I'm worthless, I don't deserve anything, and I feel bad. I'm lying to myself. That's a big key right there, but we've lost touch with that. We've lost this idea of paying attention to our feelings because we're told feelings are bad, especially the ones that have pain that comes along with them, or discomfort. Those are especially bad. We definitely don't deal with those. We don't talk about those. Nobody wants to have those. But it's all part of it. That's the key to seeing this in my opinion, in my experience, is that you cannot always see the thought, because we do have subconscious thought patterns. We have those habits that come up, just like when was the last time you had to think about how to tie your shoes? But when you were learning to tie your shoes, it was an exhaustive process. You really had to think about which way to put the string to make sure it didn't come apart later. And yet now you do it effortlessly because of those subconscious thought patterns. So the key with Sid emphasizing paying attention to the feeling. The feeling is with the thought. They're not separate. The thought contains the feeling. They are one and the same. And you will always have the feeling, even if you don't recognize the thought. And to me, that was part of the key of actually really getting this, was recognizing that when I'm having those feelings, it's because I'm having a thought, even if I don't see the thought. And for me, that was really very eye-opening to see that part of it.
That's kind of the connection of formless and form, connecting as a whole, and thus you feel whole.
Right.
You know, there's a story that I've told a couple of times, but it may well be that people aren't here, because I think what you're talking about, Greg, is profound, because I would say the vast majority of our thoughts are unconscious. But like Sid says, we've got a virus detector. We're all going to get psychological viruses, but we've got a virus detector. And like you said, it's our feeling level. And to me, there are two things to the core of understanding the principles. I'll just, in my little simple mind. Number one, and then I'd like to tell a story, if I can, Harry, that brings it home. Number one is that every experience we have is a thought-created experience. And that as Greg said, if I leave it alone and just get present in my life as best as I can, that thought will pass and the experience will pass. It may take up to 4 to 5 minutes, because a thought goes through our limbic system and our neural circuitry and our physiology and all that. But if I really know that every experience I have is a thought-created experience, there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be afraid of. Number two, that beyond that thought-created experience is a default setting of mental well-being, of calm. So, and he told me, no problem, some of you might know him, and he said, no problem sharing my name, Bill. Ofer Meyer is a wonderful man over in Israel. I met him in 2008 when I went over there with Rabbi Chaim Levine, and we started with 27 combat injured soldiers from the Lebanon wars who had PTSD, and many of them had lost limbs and lost an eye and had physical injuries also, but they all were traumatized by their experience. They thought by their experience. They didn't know it was by the way they were holding that experience in their thinking. And now there's over 1,000. There's almost 1,100 members of that, and they have a big building and everything. But Ofer was in a company of 10 people in the Israeli force, and they were hit with a rocket attack or an explosion, and all 9 of the others died. A number of them in his arms. He was the medic, and his own eyeball was hanging out. He lost his eye as he tried to save their lives. And after that, all 9 of them died. He went into a deep depression, tremendous PTSD, where the only way he knew was to protect himself from stimuli and live in a dark basement and only go out when he absolutely needed food and water to sustain himself. And somehow he heard of this movement, this group of people that Rabbi Chaim Levine had pulled together. And so we met in 2008. That's 11 years ago, and since then, he has gotten. He actually translated The Missing Link into Hebrew. He's got a degree in psychology, and now he's in a 2-year fellowship in adolescent and child psychology in Israel. So he's come a long way in his understanding. Everybody with me here? A few months ago, how many people have heard me tell this story? No? Okay. So a few months ago, we're putting together a course for PTSD with a soldier from Israel, soldier from England, soldier from the United States, Judy Sedgman and myself, and The Missing Link as the conveyor. So he came on with that session. He said, I had an experience last week that I want to share with all of you. He said, I went with two friends. This was just a number of months ago now. He said, I went with two friends to Barcelona a couple of weekends ago, and I didn't know that it was a national holiday. And we walked out of the airport, and as we walked out of the airport, there were fireworks and explosions in the air. There were rockets going off of celebration. Now, speaking to what we were talking about, Greg, his brain received that information and made a very rapid decision that there was a rocket attack like the one that had killed his 9 comrades, and he had lost his eye in. And so suddenly, without any willful part on his part, his heart's beating 160. His breathing is heavy. Sweat's pouring out of him because his body is preparing him for whatever he needs to do to try to survive. Everybody with me here? Because he carried to him that experience, this level of understanding of the principles, he was not frightened by the physical, very uncomfortable physical and emotional experience that he was having, because he said, I knew, number one, I knew it was a thought-created experience. And without even thinking, I dropped and sat on the curb as quietly as I could. I didn't try to do anything to change my experience. I knew it would change on its own if I left it alone. And he said within 5 minutes, my heart rate was completely normal. My breathing was completely normal. And I felt a deep level of calm. And from that feeling, I looked up at the fireworks and I said, is this cool or what? And he and his friends went off and had a wonderful weekend in Barcelona. They did not have to take the next plane back to Tel Aviv. Sid is often quoted, and I don't know where the quote's from, but it makes sense. It certainly sounds like something that he would have said, that if people just were not frightened by their experience, the world would change. Because they would know that the experience was just a thought-created experience that would pass, and they'd return back to their state of mental well-being if they had the courage and the understanding to be present without trying to do anything with their thinking, as Greg talked about. I think that's a powerful story, and that's why I shared it.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And it also shows the true healing process.
And with the feelings, Sid also talked about it being a barometer for your thinking. And you think about what a barometer is used for, it's measuring invisible changes in atmospheric pressure.
Right.
So you're talking about, feelings are measuring, they're essentially measuring the changes in our invisible thinking, our unconscious, subconscious thinking. That's why it's so important to pay attention to that. And what Bill just talked about with the do nothing, that story right there, what he was just talking about is exactly what Sid was talking about with do nothing. When you have that thought in your head and you realize it, just you don't do anything about it. You can't force it to go away. You didn't force it to come in, and you're not going to force it to go away. It's going to come and go as it pleases. It'll do it in its own time. And if you don't give it the energy and don't give any effort toward it, it will go away faster just because you're not keeping it there. If you're fighting something, it has to be there, right? So if you stop fighting it, eventually it gets bored and goes away. In my experience, anyway.
It's important to understand what Greg's talking about. Do nothing is not a technique. He's not following up something that was written in a book. That's more an intuitive do nothing. That's an instinctual do nothing. That's an awareness do nothing type of thing, rather than a actual, your intellect is actually not involved in that do nothing. And that allows you to naturally, the true nature of the principles will then always guide you in the right direction. because it's obvious. It's just common sense. Common sense says that's where it is. I can
To
be
me-
afraid, or I can go into nothing.
Hmm.
That's the freedom we're looking for, to go into nothing. And in
One
that
thing
nothingness,
I like, Harry, is that the reason that it's like doing nothing is that if you had a huge cork that somebody attached weights to it to pull it under the water, which you can do with your thinking, the cork being our mental well-being, once you cut the lines to those weights, those weights on the cork, you don't have to do anything. That cork knows, you don't have to push the cork towards the surface. Cork knows where its home is. And
beautiful.
that's the same of our mental well-being.
Yeah. You know, I feel, Bill, if we've looked at this topic maybe halfway, I would love for you to come on and for us to delve a little bit deeper into the continuation of this. Would you be open to that?
Of course, of course.
Well, I feel we've covered a tremendous amount of territory and a lot of clarity. And if we could continue this conversation, which personally I've really been enriched by, that would, I think others would also very much like that. And in the educational tone of our shows, and what you're pointing towards, that depth of what you're pointing to, I think it will be very, very stimulating. So we'll arrange a time as soon as possible to continue with this scenario. And if anyone has a final question for Mr. Bill Pettit Jr. or William Pettit or Dr. Pettit Jr. Yeah, I like that junior part. Yeah. Anyway, certainly, you know, feel free to finish the show with that.
We can use it, or if we collect questions, we can use that as a basis for the discussion next time too.
Okay, well then I'll ask. Before the show started, we looked at the word nature, and Bill said, "No, Harry, we're talking about two different types of nature." What I was expressing, what Bill is talking about, the true nature of the principle. Maybe that would be a nice way to roll into where we're going to roll into next time.
Okay. You want me to talk about that now or then? Yeah.
No, I think as a final, some people.
Well, you know, like Sid says, you know, the principles, when they take form, when he talks about they take form as nature, meaning the things that we can see, the formed inner. It's different use of the word to me when we say the nature of something. I just looked it up in my Oxford dictionary, and it just talks about the nature of something is when you're speaking to the true essence of something. That's the nature of it. And so the true nature of these principles is again, they are a metaphor. They're formless. And Sid even said, if you pushed me, there's really only one universal mind. But to understand how they manifest in our everyday life, that we use this power of mind and thought, the power of thought, and then we're conscious of what we think creates our experience. We're creating our experience. He uses the three principles as a metaphor that everything that exists is divine energy, either in form or formless, period. It's a metaphor for that. And now if I am divine energy that in a form, and that means that I have the intelligent energy of the universe at my beck and call, at my at every moment of my life, if I'm willing to not go looking with my intellect and try to figure it out so I can take credit for it. So to me, that's the essence of it. That the principles are a metaphor for the fact that everything that exists in the universe, including you and I. You know, I just read this book where we all identify the us and the thems. But what's true is the more that people understand these principles, there's no thems. We're all us's because we're all the same energy in a different disguise. I noticed that as we traveled at the airports, I saw people of every color and height and weight, and I thought we're all the same. We're all this divine energy. Isn't this wonderful? It's like there's no two snowflakes that are the same, right? There's no two human beings that are exactly the same. You know, it's beautiful. Anyway.
And one of the things oh, you have something to say, Mark? No, okay. One of the things that what Bill is talking about, something simple was once revealed to me by Sid. He said, in the old days, they used the word spiritual because there was no energy. You know, when Bill was talking, he was talking about this energy. And so spiritual is just the word pre-energy experience, because the world didn't have that as part of their terminology. So it became spiritual and then religious. But reality is spiritual and energy are really equal meaning. When Sid talked to physicists, he started to use the word spiritual, and they go, can't use that word here. Energy. And he said, oh, okay. So erase spiritual and put in energy. And, you know, when Bill brings those two worlds together beautifully, that's a very, that's oneness. That's oneness. So Bill, wrap it up. Greg, do you have anything to add?
No, I think this has been a beautiful conversation today. There's no doubt about that. It's constantly amazing to me how this series keeps growing. Just when I think we've kind of covered it, you know, what else are we going to talk about? We can. It's one of those things where it's not a problem to go almost back to topics we've already covered and just get into them deeper as our understanding deepens, and as we have, you know, guests like Bill come on with a deeper understanding and help all of us, you know, the rising tide rises all ships kind of thing, you know, so we're all growing together, we're all expanding together. And I want people to understand that, because this series, all these shows that we've done are for all of you. It's for all of us. It's for Harry and I. And we had this conversation recently, Harry and I did, about how much each of us has grown just in the 3 years we've been doing this. In probably, 2 more shows, it'll be 3 years. I mean, I honestly had no clue that this would last this long, and that it would become such a huge, beautiful thing within the Three Principles community, and even without. I get messages from people who don't know anything about the principles now. They're finding the YouTube channel. And it's amazing to just see this expansion within humanity and to watch the ships all rising together. And with this being the year of perfect vision, I have a feeling we're going to see more people waking up. It's 2020. It's the year of perfect vision. We'll see more people awakening to this and seeing for themselves. Put on that new pair of glasses and see the world in a totally different way. It's the same world. It's the same one you've always seen. You'll just look at it differently and see the beauty in it rather than the other stuff.
And the wisdom.
Well, the wisdom is what helps you see the beauty.
Okay.
That's what we were talking about in that silence. When you drop that personal thinking, the wisdom comes through. It's always there. We always have access to that. We just usually forget about it and we get distracted by other things. Every once in a while, we get distracted enough away from our thinking, like when you see a beautiful sunset or something. All your worries drop away and you're just in that moment. That's like Bill was talking about with the cork. You cut the weights off the cork, it just floats right back to where it's supposed to be.
It's a
Well,
beautiful metaphor for sure. Bill,
If
you want to say one last word? And then,
I had a last word, it would be just to encourage people to be gentle with yourselves.
yes.
Please be gentle with yourselves on this journey. Please, as best as you can. I don't mean to tell people what to do, but I encourage you to be gentle with yourself, to be to the degree that you can, to feel gratitude for what you've seen, rather than focusing on what you haven't seen yet. Because the gratitude that you have for what you've seen, Sid said, will always carry you to see more. But looking to see more, you're going to be, the only thing you can look for is with your intellect, and you're going to get frustrated. So I just encourage people to be gentle. We're all human beings. We're going to make mistakes. There's nothing wrong with making amends, saying I'm sorry, I goofed, and start the journey up again. Every moment of my life now I experience as a second chance. That's exciting.
Yeah.
I can't undo anything I did 5 minutes ago. If I need to make amends or say I'm sorry or do what I can, and there may be some things that I can't, but I can learn from it and go forward with gratitude that I even am aware when I cause people pain or make it harder for people. And you just find gratitude in what you have seen. I just encourage that. That's been an important lesson for me, to continue to be grateful for what I have seen and to be gentle on myself, and to take every moment as a second chance. So that's all.
Self-love. Finding self-love really changed everything for me. Being gentle with yourself. Thank you so much, Bill, for joining us. Yeah, looking forward to continuing this conversation, whenever we can get you on, which should be fairly soon. Thank you again for joining us, and thanks everybody for coming today. It's really, like I said, this is about all of us, so this is your show too. That's why we have it in open format. If you want to participate, that's add what you've got. We all have this knowledge. We all have this wisdom. So I love you all. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Yes.